How's it going, everyone? Reckless Yugi here, and in today's video, what I like to do is just kind of rant a bit about the issues I've been having over the last 3 months with one of Asus's premium motherboards, the x99 Deluxe. And this motherboard received a lot of positive reviews from all the major tech tubers out there, but for me, it just hasn't been running very stable. And for the last 3 months since I installed it in my system, I've just been beating my head against the desk trying to get it to actually work. And throughout that time, I've talked to 7 different tech representatives, asking them for their expert opinion as far as what was going on with my motherboard. And out of those 7, I'd say about 2 of them actually were competent enough to give me real world answers, as far as answers that directed me to something that was really happening with the motherboard and what was happening with the computer. And the others just kind of gave me cookie cutter answers as far as like check RAM, the CPU's bad, like that's what they told me. But I've told them the issues that have been happening ever since they first started developing. And up to a week ago, I didn't know what was going on, but then last week I finally figured out the issue. And so that's why I'm kind of making this video now, because I finally figured it out. But it took that amount of time to try to figure it out, and a lot of money spent on top of the money already spent on the system, because I had to replace the motherboard once. I had to buy a new power supply based on the recommendations from the Asus tech support, and then I finally figured out the issue, and it ended up being the motherboard itself. And it was a weird issue, which I wasn't aware of, and I don't know, it's just something that was weird that was happening. And it really took them by surprise, because I finally got to a senior level engineer type individual who was going to address the issue and kind of look into it more closely. So anyways, this is just this sort of a video where I kind of rant about it a bit. Now, the issue that I was having with it is when I first built it and installed Windows, it worked beautifully. I was able to overclock it with the Asus AI, or the Asus Suite AI, where it would just basically do the overclock for me, and it worked really well. I got 4.5 with 1.29 volts, and it says that was stable, and that's what I was running. But after about 3 or 4 boots afterward, it would kind of hang up during the boot process. And at the point where the BIOS would check all the hardware and make sure everything was actually working and compatible, and then it attempted to hand over controls to the operating system on the hard drive, that's where it kind of dropped the ball. And at first it was giving me AE codes, which were legacy boot event codes, and that's because I had the operating system installed as an legacy boot or legacy OS. And then I eventually switched it over to UEFI, and then it will give me a different code, but doing the same thing. The different code was an A6, and that was basically something that was reserved for future use. But during the whole time of me doing this, I had to press the clear CMOS button just to, I guess, clear the BIOS, be able to go back in the BIOS, reset my overclock, and then I was able to go back into the operating system. And whenever I would do that, I was in the operating system, everything was working perfectly fine. I was able to edit videos, play games just fine without the system crashing. But then after I would restart it or turn it off and try to turn it back on, it wouldn't boot again, and it would do that kind of hang up where it wouldn't actually do the handshake between the BIOS and the operating system, and then I'll have to press clear MOS again. And you know, that was fine for about maybe the first month. I was just able to just hit the clear MOS and do what I needed and get it up and running, and then do what I needed for the channel. But that got really old, and I was getting really tired of it. So I called Asus many times trying to address this issue. And the first time I called them, the guy was completely taken away as far as what was going on. He didn't know. So he said he was going to talk to his senior tech representative and then get back to me. He never got back to me. So I called him again. And I mean, like, this was about maybe like a 24-hour period. I waited until I called him back, and he still never got back to me. So I called him again. The second representative I spoke to, he basically wasn't very warm to the thought of trying to troubleshoot the board with me. He just told me that I can either RMA it or just, I don't know, leave it broken. And that was his options he gave to me. So he wasn't very friendly when it came to trying to assist me with my motherboard. And so then I eventually RMA'd it, because there was nothing I could do. I didn't know anything else. So I RMA'd it, and it was going to take a month for me to get a new motherboard. And I didn't want to sit here with a month without being able to upload and make content for YouTube. So I kind of bit the bullet, and I purchased another motherboard off Amazon and got it here 2 days later, so that I installed that into the system, brand new board, and it was still doing the same thing. So then I was beginning to think that it wasn't the motherboard, that it could be something else. And I didn't really know who to turn to. I tried looking on forums, and my motherboard is so new that it's not really out there as far as specific guidelines on how to troubleshoot it for the problem I was having. So I once again called Asus and asked them for their support. And after they told me that it can't be the motherboard, that it's either probably the CPU or the RAM, or even maybe the hard drives. And I kind of explained to them what I had. I mean, the CPU I have is a 5960X, the top of the line Intel right now, which is fantastic. I have RAM from G-Skill, which G-Skill is a respectable company. And then my hard drives are the new Samsung 850 Pros, and they just work. They run beautifully as well too. So they didn't really know what was going on, but then one of the representatives told me that it could possibly be the power supply. Even though it's a quality power supply, it was a Corsair HX1000i at the time. That power supply might just be acting buggy, and I should probably replace it. So instead of going through a future process of me replacing that power supply, I ended up buying an Asus AX1200i. So it's a step up from the 1000i, and definitely a step up as far as the whole like how nice of a power supply it is. It's definitely a next step up in the tier of quality. And I installed that power supply in here, and I was still getting the same issue. So it definitely wasn't the power supply. And I called them again, asked them what could possibly be happening, and I kind of got the same issues as far as like them telling me it's going to be either the RAM or the CPU, and I'm pretty sure it wasn't, but I just decided to drop it and leave it like that for about a month until I got really tired of it. And then I called Asus again, trying to see if I could get some different support, thinking that someone out there might have had a similar issue. They might have figured out what the problem might be. So I called them and I talked to this one gentleman who was actually the second knowledgeable person I spoke to from Asus. And this guy was actually awesome. He had me go through and unplug everything from the SATA ports, only plug in the operating system into one of the SATA ports, check different settings. And then at that point, he kind of determined that it wasn't the hard drive or the SATA ports of the motherboard, but it could possibly be that the RAM was there. And he told me on the phone that if I go through, check the RAM, basically like turn it off and take out all the RAM sticks except for one, just place it in there and then try the different overclocks and then try the different settings to see if it still gives me the same issues. And do that with each stick of RAM in different ports just to see what was going on. And then if that still wasn't the issue, he pretty much said that it couldn't be the CPU because once the system is up and running, it runs perfectly fine. But if it's not the RAM, then it has to be some sort of weird compatibility issue, and then we would have to kind of go to a engineer and ask them, tell him my exact setup, and then he will try to run the scenario to see if he sees the same thing, and then try to diagnose a problem there for my specific situation. So I thought, cool. So I got off the phone with him, went through and started checking all the different RAMs and doing that, and then none of them seemed to work, and I thought that's kind of weird. So one thing I did notice though is when I would take out the RAM and put it in, and every time I wasn't turning off the power supply, I was just making sure that the system was off. But once I clicked the power supply off and turned it on, the system would boot. So I kind of discovered that I don't need to keep hitting the clear CMOS button anymore, but if I just cycled the power supply, it would boot perfectly. And that was with an overclock, that was with everything maxed out, it would boot just perfectly fine. But if I didn't click, or if I didn't click the power supply, it wouldn't go past the the handshake between the BIOS and the hard drive. So the next day, once I figured that, I decided to call Asus again and say, hey, this is everything that's happened so far. I gave them my, the reference number as far as the issues I've been having. And I spoke to this one lady who didn't really seem like, this person just really upset me. I just wanted to strangle. And what happened was I told her what happened with the guy before and how I checked all the RAM, and if that doesn't seem to affect, or if that works perfectly fine, then I can go and talk to the engineer. So I called them, told them everything was going on. I said, okay, so I did this, and I noticed this new phenomenon where I powered the power supply, it would work perfectly fine, but if I didn't, then it wouldn't. So it seemed like if I didn't cut the power to the board, it won't actually boot up fine the next time. So I told her this, and then she started telling me some BS about trying to troubleshoot, saying that it's not a hardware issue, it's gonna be a software issue. So my operating system on my hard drive is the faulty component. And she said I needed to get a different installer, a different Windows installer, and install it that way. So she basically wanted me to get a new copy of Windows and install it onto my PC, where I explained to her, if I just cycle the power supply, it does perfectly fine. So how could it possibly be the operating system? And so this really upset me to the point where I was yelling at her, telling her that she doesn't know what she's talking about. And then I hung up. So, I mean, I wasn't really mature, but that was something that kind of threw me off, that couldn't possibly be it. And she was giving me this information. So I can only imagine what sort of ill information she was giving other people who were asking tech, or who were asking Asus for their tech support. But So at this point, like, I thought maybe it's some sort of weird ground issue. So I kind of looked at the back and I was about to unplug everything from my computer. I was about to unplug everything, like take the motherboard out, and I was going to place it on a cardboard box and plug everything back into it to make sure that there is no possible grounding issue. And then I kind of looked at all the power supply or all the USB cords hanging out in the back, and I decided to plug out all my USBs from the back of the motherboard, and then just try to run it with my keyboard and mouse hooked up. And phenomenally, it worked. So I was able to work just fine with the keyboard and mouse, and I was thinking that's kind of weird. So I thought like maybe one of my components, one of my USB components, were causing the issues. So the things that I have hooked up to my motherboard right now is just my webcam, my mouse and keyboard, the audio interface for my whole audio setup here, as well as my audio interface for my gaming headset. And that's it. So not a whole lot of things are hooked up to it, but I'm assuming maybe the audio interface is drawing more power than the others. And so when I unplugged everything and only had the mouse and keyboard in there, it booted just fine. And so I thought like there was something possibly wrong. So I took out each component and plugged them in one by one just to see what was the one component that's throwing it off, and they all worked fine. And then it wasn't until I plugged everything back in, it would stop booting. And then once I plug everything out, it would boot just fine. And I wasn't even cycling the power supply. So I came to the realization that the motherboard was having some sort of power management issue where if all the things were plugged into the USB ports in the back, or at least what I have plugged into the back, it will kind of freeze up when it tries to talk to the operating system, and that's where it will drop the ball. So at this point, I figured out what the issue was, and I called Asus to tell him about this, and then finally got through to an actual engineer and told him about all the issues I've been having, and they said they'll call me back within 48 hours. It's been about 4 days now. I still haven't heard any word back, but I just noticed last Friday they updated the BIOS to a new BIOS, so that was plenty of time for them to figure out the issue and probably updated the BIOS. So maybe that was the issue or that was the fix, but that whole long process of me trying to figure out what was going on with the motherboard turned out to be the motherboard, and the reason why it was acting so strange was because it didn't like having multiple USB ports or multiple USB devices plugged into the ports while it was booting up. And the ultimate fix that I had to do was just go into the BIOS, make sure fast boot was on, because if fast boot was on, you could go in and disable the USB drives when it's booting up, and I did that, and now it's been working perfectly fine ever since. So I have fast boot enabled, I have secure boot enabled, everything is enabled in the motherboard except for the USB ports when it's doing the boot up, and now it's just working phenomenally well, and it's rock steady. But this whole long process of me trying to beat my head against the desk, trying to ask Asus tech support as far as what was going on, it ended up being just a fault with the motherboard. It can't specifically be like my motherboard, because this is the second motherboard I purchased from Amazon, which it was new in the box, and it still had this issue. So that's just kind of weird. And that's, you know, Asus, I think, might have some sort of quality control issues when it comes to these new motherboards. So maybe in the future it will be fixed and remedied when everyone else is starting to kind of evolve into the x99 platform. But right now it is perplexing. I understand that it's a new platform. I'm basically the guinea pig, but I shouldn't be the guinea pig forced to purchase extra things just to get this to work. I think that's a little bit offset, and I tried to see if Asus would give me my money back for at least the ARM-made board, because I don't need it, and it would have taken so long for them to give me, or it would, because I didn't want to wait so long for them to give me the board that I try to RMA. So I don't know, overall it was just a negative experience, and I am very unhappy with Asus at the moment. In the future it might change, but right now I would not buy an Asus board ever again. And I guess that's just kind of the end of my rant, because I was trying to think of doing this video as sort of a review, but I really don't know too much about what goes on. I was able to give you the best explanation I could, as far as me suspecting that it's just a power management issue with the motherboard itself. So that was my issues with the x99 Deluxe, and I finally have it running, and it's running perfectly now. So anyways, thank you all for watching. I do greatly appreciate it, and I'm gonna go play some games right after I'm finished editing this video, all right? So have a good one, guys, and I'll talk to you guys again in the next video, all right? Bye-bye.